To get us started, I would like to introduce my colleague Devin Dadson, who is the Senior Communications Specialist at the U.S. Botanic Garden. He's going to share a little bit of context about the U.S. Botanic Garden's history with sustainable landscaping and the Landscape for Life partnership. Thanks for being here, Devin.
Thanks, everybody. We'll get the slides queued up here. Let's switch those to be the primary item. All right, that should be working for everybody. Hi, from United States Botanic Garden. Hopefully you've been here to the garden before. If you've not, we're located here on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. and have been established since 1820. And our history with sustainable landscaping as formal programs goes back a number of years, actually. We're right at the sort of the 20-year mark. You might have heard about LEED. LEED certification for a building, right? That really helps talk about sustainability in designing a building. And we were looking at the program in the early 2000s and realized that it sort of stopped at the edge of the building, at the building skin, and it didn't encompass the full site that a building is sitting on as part of the sustainability. So for a number of years there, you can see 2006 to 2013, we actually worked with two other colleague organizations to create a counterpart for LEED. It's called the Sustainable Sites Initiative. Developed there in collaboration with the American Society of Landscape Architects and Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas. And this multi-year project brought together tons of experts in sustainability and in landscaping and gardening and design to really hammer out how do we make a full certification program that has specs that people can do sustainable renovations and designs for landscapings. And I'm happy to say that in 2015, Green Business Certification, Inc. took over the program officially, and it is now offered as a full counterpart along with LEED certification. And so buildings and their landscapes can both be certified through GBCI. So that was a positive item. This is the Sustainable Sites Initiative website. If you've never heard of this program before and you want to learn more, I would definitely recommend checking out the Sustainable Sites website. They've got some great pilot projects from all across the US and around the world that are Sustainable Sites certified, including our own site here that we'll talk about in just a moment as an example. In further conversation, we realized, though, about 5 years into the project, that really the Sustainable Sites program was geared toward landscaping professionals. And we were hearing from a number of our visitors and colleagues that they wanted to be able to adapt that same sort of sustainability information for a residential scale. And so in the process, we decided to make one geared for the residential scale called Landscape for Life. So in 2011, that specifically carried on working with that Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center there at University of Texas at Austin. And for several years, we offered Landscape for Life in collaboration with Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And I'm happy to say in 2022, Colorado State University Extension took over as our collaborating partner organization. We're going to hear from Darren from CSU Extension in a little bit. She's going to talk all about sort of what is Landscape for Life's main components and give us some updates on what's happening these days and what's to come. But I wanted to share one other thing, right? Since US Botanic Garden has this history of developing these programs, we actually had an opportunity recently to put them to practice and to bring them to life. So I wanted to share a moment about how you can come see these elements here in Washington, D.C. At the United States Botanic Garden. This is a photo, a historic photo from about 10, 12 years ago of Bartholdi Gardens, at that time called Bartholdi Park. You might see some information about that. It's one and the same. This is a garden space that was created for us in 1932, and it is centered around a massive fountain. It's a big 30-foot tall fountain made by Frederic August Bartholdi, hence the name Bartholdi Gardens. And this is the guy who went on to make the Statue of Liberty. This was a project he made first in 1876. So from the beginning, we had this fountain and gardens around it. And for decades, they continued showcasing trends in horticulture. And it was time for a renovation in the early 2000s. And so in 2015, we did a full renovation of this park for the first time ever. And we used the Sustainable Sites Initiative. And so the project finished in 2016. It did use those initiatives. Some of the things that we talked about as part of the project, our goals were reducing rainwater runoff and reusing plants and materials, being as much locally sourced as possible, incorporating native plants for wildlife, food, human habitat, increased accessibility. And I'll showcase what you can come find and how these come to life. So here That's just another photo. We're going to come back to this photo in a little bit better, in a better way momentarily. If you look down front, you might see these very bright red flowers. These are hibiscus, and they're specifically in a rain garden. Here's that same rain garden just right before the flowers had come up and bloomed. DC is a combined sewage overflow system, being a historic East Coast city. And the problem is, anytime you get a heavy rainflow system that would combine with sewage flow out into the river, we wanted to not be part of that anymore. And so we added 10 rain garden spaces in this renovation. We can now capture 100% of the rainfall that falls on the site, allow it to soak back in the ground, keep it out of that combined sewage overflow system. So that's a pretty exciting moment there. Let's look at the next one. Plants, of course, for a garden. Plants are a big deal for us. Plants are also a big deal when you're talking about sustainable landscaping, and sustainable sites initiative makes sure that your project has at least 50% or more of your plants being native. Um, our gardens here showcase plants native to the Mid-Atlantic region. You'll see some additional ones that are some edibles, but we'll go back to those in a moment. And specifically, we did save some really large trees on site. This is Kentucky coffee tree. There's several of these and others that were saved on site that were historic specimens that have been there for a long time. And associated with saving plants during the project, we also saved soil. Topsoil is really important. We removed the topsoil, we kept it off site. And for the trees and the plants that did stay, we protected the soil so it didn't get compacted in the process. Got two final sort of pieces to talk about here. This beautiful pathway going down through is a new pathway, and we were able to reuse materials from other parts of the U.S. Capitol that had been taken up over time and weren't being used. And so these flagstones there are reused. But really cool, the former sidewalks that were in the space, we actually kept that material, we ground it up, and it became the base layer underneath these new pathways. And so a really nice sort of double reuse and recycling there of some of those materials. And then finally, human health is a really big part of Sustainable Sites Initiative. And so we added a ton of new furniture throughout the space for let people have spaces for meetings and lunch and gatherings. And we added a kitchen garden. And the kitchen garden for us is a human space to engage, talk about plants, teach people about plants, using it as an educational space. And you can see that the borders of this kitchen garden are even built at a slope with the intent of accessibility in mind. We are next door to the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorial, and so we wanted to make sure that the space was welcoming and accessible for all. So we added a number of accessible entrances, and we made this kitchen garden elevated on our rake so people could sit or stand or lean over and work in this kitchen garden in multiple ways. There's a photo of some kids helping us do some planting. And we're offering educational tours. So this was literally just earlier this week. This was one of our colleagues, Elizabeth Barton, doing a tour. We offer tours and educational components, both in written forms for kids to look and learn about sustainability and native plants in this space. Educational interpretive signage does that as well. And we have in-person tours and online educational programs like this to help tell the story of how Bartholdi Fountain and Gardens really showcases this sustainability. And you can see we're literally just steps away from the U.S. Capitol building. And so we're excited about our history with sustainable landscaping and these programs that we were helped developed over the years. And I'm really excited that we've got Darren here with us today as our current partner to talk about what is Landscape for Life today. So I'm going to pitch it to Emily to do the introduction, and we hope you'll come out and explore Bartholdi Gardens.
Thank you so much, Devin, for that background and helping us understand some of the context of our work in this area. And yes, if people are in DC, please come visit us in Bartholdi Fountain and Gardens and check out the space. I would love to introduce now our presenter for the day. Darren Davidson is the Sustainable Landscape State Specialist for Colorado State University Extension. In this role, she leads the Landscape for Life program, develops and delivers educational programs, and provides expert consultation to public and private sectors on creating sustainable, resilient landscapes. Darren is committed to native plant horticulture and pollinator conservation, a passion that grew during her time as a horticulturist at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. She champions the use of thoughtful design and sustainable horticultural practices to foster biodiversity and implement nature-based solutions that enhance urban resilience and livability. Welcome, Darren. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. Yeah, let's dive into this. So first I want to say that I'm based in Colorado along the Front Range, and I had the opportunity to travel to DC 2 weeks ago. And so I was just at the garden that Devin was sort of giving you the quick tour through, and it was so fun to actually see it in person and then to see what he was showing up on the slide deck. So highly recommend a visit to DC and to the US Botanic Gardens. Then I want to say that I was looking at the chat, and we have people visiting from all over the country for this webinar, and that is really exciting too. Because Landscape for Life, as you can see, the title of our talk, Creating a Sustainable Landscape Anywhere with Landscape for Life, it really is designed to be applicable to wherever you garden. So with that, I will start to dive in, but thank you so much for hosting this webinar. So the picture on my title slide there on the top, that is in Florida. The middle one there is Virginia, and the bottom one is here in Colorado. All examples of sustainable landscapes. And I'm going to now kind of dive into why we want to think about sustainability, how we apply that to our garden spaces, and how Landscape for Life can really help sort of guide that process. So there's a lot of material, and I'm going to cover it quickly, but we have lots of resources for you to dive in more after if you're interested. So just a few big things. Sustainability is important because we only have one planet, and we have a lot of people on this planet. We're adding approximately 7 million people every month. All those people need more resources and more infrastructure. As of 2008, 2009, we reached a tipping point where over half of the global population historically had lived in rural areas, now live in urban areas. So, you know, that's a lot of people in sort of concentrated areas, putting a lot of pressure on the planet. We're also, with all of that growth and urbanization, we're losing habitat, we're losing open spaces. So this picture is downtown Denver, Colorado. You can see the football stadium, the downtown, all the parking lots and the roads. So of course we have to build infrastructure that supports us, but we can do it in a thoughtful way that also supports the other creatures, plants and wildlife that live here. So a few kind of heavy statistics just to bring the point home. Wildlife habitat loss in the US is approximately 2.2 million acres per year, and only 3 to 5% of land worldwide remains undisturbed habitat. So we can really think through how we garden, how our cities and communities do landscaping in a more sustainable way. So we have these pressures. We've got population growth, we have demand on our natural resources, and we're losing our natural areas. So one of the solutions, which is very exciting, is that if we take a holistic approach and address them all together, that's where we can find sustainability. And that's what we're talking about today. So some of you may have seen this Venn diagram before, but no matter what realm of sustainability, you know, we hear that word all the time now. Hospitality industry has sustainability, rental cars, you hear it all the time, but this is what we're talking about. The point where decisions are made that consider social, economic, and environmental factors. When we have a balance of those three things, that's where we find sustainability. So when we're talking about sustainable landscapes and what our practices are, we want to take into consideration all three of those things. We truly are stewards of the land, whether you are a very small scale gardener or maybe this is your profession and you manage large acres of land. We have the opportunity to really make a difference in how we steward our landscapes, our gardens, and how we interact with these spaces. And I think one of the really cool and exciting things is that over the course of my career in horticulture, you can really see this ripple effect. So if somebody is doing this kind of practice, it piques, you know, a neighbor's interest or somebody else's interest, and they get curious and they start doing it. And those combined efforts really start to add up. So if we look at landscapes, what is the objective of a landscape? Typically, in the past, we want a beautiful garden. We want something pretty to look at. If it's our home garden, we want some curb appeal. So if we throw the word sustainable in there, what is a sustainable landscape? Well, it's getting into a little bit more, not just beauty, but we want a landscape that maximizes environmental and human health benefits for current and future generations. So we're not just thinking about this current season, we're thinking about what we're doing today and how that impacts our kids and our grandkids. So that's sort of the definition of a sustainable landscape. So what is the objective? Well, we still want it to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be, there's kind of a misconception if we're doing things sustainably or using native plants, it's going to be messy. But we can still have a beautiful garden, but it's going to be one that protects or restores the benefits that nature provides to us, to humans, that are essential to our everyday life. So I'm going to get into what I mean by that a little bit more, but essentially we can have curb appeal and we can have ecological value. It's not one or the other. Doug Tallamy, I'm guessing a lot of you have heard of him. He's a professor at the University of Delaware. He's also an author of many great books. He has this quote where he says, in the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty, but now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. And so, it could be argued that gardens and landscapes have done these things in the past. They certainly have. But I think one of the key differences is the intentionality behind it. So again, how are we choosing to garden? And are we really leveraging those ecosystem services? And that's what we're going to get into now. So a sustainable landscape will build healthy soils, capture, clean, and store water, control erosion, provide habitat, do all of these different things. And what those really are, if you haven't heard of ecosystem services before, this is a cool graphic that sort of breaks them apart. They are, I'm going to go back to this. Ecosystem services is any type of benefit to people that we can get from nature. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that. But it's basically things that nature provides and we just benefit sort of free of charge. Some folks have actually put monetary value on those things just so that we can conceptually understand, because it makes it more tangible. But with strong ecosystem services, we have a stronger economy, we have more diverse food products, we have advances in all kinds of areas. And so what are we talking about ecosystem services? Well, here's one: pollination. Bees and other invertebrates are out there pollinating. We don't ask them to do that. It's just part of their life cycle. They do it and we benefit. We get beautiful flowers in our natural areas and we get food. Raw fiber for things, that's cotton right there, for things like, fabric. Human health and well-being, that is another ecosystem service. We're getting outside, we're moving our bodies, we're getting away from our screens. Stormwater management and mitigation. That's a picture of a rain garden. Devin showed a rain garden that they have, I think he said they have 10 there, which is amazing. So this garden is capturing runoff from the parking lot and cleaning the water, storing it, getting back in the soil. Again, another ecosystem service. And finally, medicine. So we get all kinds of benefits from nature. And what we're going to look at today is, how do we manage for these? How do we really intentionally help those? How do we, support and nurture those systems so that they can support and nurture us? That is where Landscape for Life comes into play. So Devin gave you the background on it, and CSU Extension is so thrilled to be partnering with the U.S. Botanic Gardens on this program. If you heard in the introduction, the connection to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, I was a horticulturist at the Wildflower Center when this program was being developed. And so it's really fun that I now get to play a role in that. So the tagline, harness nature's power to create healthy, beautiful landscapes. I just love that. We're working with nature rather than controlling it or, not really understanding it. We're really diving in and recognizing that we are a part of these natural systems. So this is just a screenshot from the website, and we're going to have links to different things, including the website. So with Landscape for Life, we have these different buckets, these different areas of learning that you really want to focus on when you're looking at sustainable landscaping. So soil, water, plants, materials, health, pollinators, and maintenance. I'll get into the training part later. But, all of these are kind of general gardening things, right? Like, of course, soil, water, plants, maybe the material. But again, it's the intentionality, and it's really paying attention to all of those things, but maybe in a little bit of a different way than you normally do. So we're going to kind of go through all of those, and we're also going to go through the slide that I had where it said sustainable landscapes can build and maintain healthy soils and all the different things. So Soil is the foundation, literally, of a healthy garden, whether it's veggie gardening or, creating habitat or flower gardens, perennial gardens. We have to have healthy soil. And when we do, we get all of these other benefits. Carbon capture and storage, we get water storage and filtration, biological function and diversity. So I know that we have people from all over the country on this, and there are different practices that happen in all of our different areas. We have very different types of soil. We have different amounts of precipitation and organic matter. However, all of these principles apply no matter where you are gardening. So tilling is one thing that people look at. So there's a long-standing practice. When I'm going out in the garden in the spring, I need to prepare the soil. This is a point where we're sort of dialing that back, and we're saying, well, do you, or is your soil okay? If it's too dry and you're rototilling or really breaking things up, you're going to break apart these microhabitats. If it's too wet, you're going to compact the soil, which is a real problem for future plant growth. So it's important to remember and know that soil is very alive. It is said that soil is actually the most biologically diverse habitat on the planet. It's full of nematodes, fungus, bacteria, microscopic insects, all kinds of life down there. And when we have healthy soil, all of those things are helping our plants grow better and other systems work. It's pretty amazing, but there are more microbes in 1 teaspoon of soil, wait for it, drum roll, than there are people on the planet. So there can be upwards of 10 billion microbes in 1 teaspoon of soil. So again, very, very diverse. So we really want to support that. This is just a fun picture of several of those different microbes. This is an electron microscopy sort of collage of different things that are actually living in your soil, helping it hold together and make nutrients more available to plants. So soil, super important. Healthy soil is also going to be able to capture and store that water, like Devin was talking about. Lots of communities, the rainwater, if we get a big storm, we try to just move it off site as quickly as we can and get it into stormwater treatment. But if we can actually return it into the water cycle just by cleaning it through rain gardens and having it naturally move into those spaces, that is much more beneficial to the system. Then if we look at clean air and clean water, sustainable landscapes can really help support that. Planet Earth is often called the water planet. We are mostly covered with water. Most of that water is salt water. A little bit of it is fresh water. Of course, we need fresh water. However, most of that fresh water is locked up in polar ice caps and not available to us. Less than 1% of the freshwater supply on the planet is available for our use. So whether you live in an area with lots of precipitation or little precipitation, we want to be conscientious of how we're using that water. So if you're somewhere where you require irrigation systems, of course, you only want to irrigate when the plants need water. We want to water at the right time of day. We don't want to just turn it on willy-nilly. Hand watering is a really great option. That way you are actually physically seeing how much water is being put on the ground. You might not have a gallon tracker, but generally speaking, when people hand water, they water less than if they just turn on their irrigation system, and the plants are still getting enough. Paying attention to pervious and impervious materials is really important. Again, that whole idea of the stone walk through the Bartoli garden that Devin was showing, there were spaces in between those stones. That's going to allow any natural precipitation to seep through there and make its way into the soil rather than rushing off like a full concrete driveway or sidewalk. So again, we're just really paying attention to all of the nuance that's going on our site. Here's another example. I'm really highlighting rain gardens, but they're so impactful and so effective. And mostly we're showing sort of commercial scale. Again, this is one that's off a parking lot, but you can do this really successfully in your home garden too. If you're going to do that, this is just a quick little diagram from Brad Lancaster. He's somebody that's down in Tucson, Arizona, and he does a lot around rainwater harvesting. Basically, what you do is you need to figure out where precipitation falls on your landscape, right? So it's going to hit your roof, your sidewalks, your driveway, and you watch where it goes. You find those low points and you figure out where you might be able to capture that water. One of the cool things about rain gardens is that they don't necessarily look like just deep pits that fill with water. You pack them with plants like those beautiful hibiscus that was shown earlier. You might be able to tell that there's a depression, but really it's just a garden full of beautiful plants. So this just sort of quickly shows you, the water is coming off your home, making its way to a rain garden. And then those deep roots are helping break up the soil, infiltrate that water, and that water is making its way back into the water cycle. And again, I know I'm just scratching the surface and covering a lot of material quickly, but again, we have lots of learning resources for you to dive in deeper. Another opportunity that is not very often thought of is gray water. Using gray water is easier in certain parts of the country. But a lot of communities in warmer climates are starting to require the gray water use. I used to live in Tucson, Arizona, and they started, all new construction started being plumbed with gray water and freshwater plumbing so that it was easy to direct that gray water to outdoor landscapes. So this is a backyard sort of home garden in Los Angeles, and you can see the mulched darker areas are depressed. So those are rain gardens, but they also capture gray water. So that's going to be things like from the shower or from the laundry. Okay, now you might not believe it, but this is my section on plants. These are some gnarly roots from a tree next to a body of water. But what this tree is doing is amazing. It is holding on to that soil and not allowing it to erode. So our plants' roots can control erosion and sediment runoff. This is one of the reasons why. So again, depending on where you live, this is the root system of prairie plants. So mostly in the Great Plains. Some of these do move west. Some of these plants work just about anywhere across the country. But if it's hard to make out what's going on the screen, you've got that line at the top, you have the green part on the bottom and the black part, green on the top, black on the bottom. So the black is showing the root system of these prairie plants. And you can see, hopefully, the numbers on the right and left side. Some of those roots can go as deep as 15 feet, which is remarkable. So if you start on the right and you go two to the left, from the right side, that little plant with the purple flowers, that plant is only about 1 foot high, but its roots go 15 feet deep. That's a blazing star, a liatris. So with those roots, they're growing, they're holding soil, they're decomposing and building that soil. And then we also have all the benefit from the above ground growth where we're providing habitat and the flowers are beautiful and it's all working together. When we think about what plants to choose when we're talking about a sustainable landscape. In Landscape for Life, we talk a lot about native plants. Again, Devin mentioned that in their project. So if we can choose native and adapted plants, erring on the side of native if possible and if available, we're going to avoid invasive species. So this is a huge one. A lot of our invasive species are escapees from the horticulture trade, from the horticulture industry. They were brought from another part of the world because, the plant collector, grower, breeder thought they looked really pretty. They would, accent other things really nicely. They would look good in the garden, right? Back to just that aesthetic and beautification. But what they didn't necessarily realize is that put in a different environment, they take over. They say, hey, I like the soil, I like the sun, I like the precipitation, and they can just take over. And what ends up happening is some of these species can push out everything else and you just get a monoculture. So that's not very interesting to us. It truly becomes a weed. It's just everywhere. And it has a big impact on wildlife and pollinators and, how the whole system kind of works together. It messes up that balance. So avoiding invasive species is hugely important. I do have up there choose native and adapted plants. So adapted means that they've been trialed and we know that yes, they like the environment, but they don't they don't go crazy. They don't become invasive. They kind of, they do what they're meant to do, and they don't seed out like crazy or have runners or spread by rhizomes. So the other benefit of native plants and adapted is that they are just that. They're adapted to your climate. So you're not going to have to do a lot of amending the soil or adding fertilizer or pesticides. They can kind of just deal with the environment that they're in. So that means less maintenance for you, fewer resources, supporting wildlife, and increasing biodiversity overall. Biodiversity is really taking a hit worldwide. And again, through our efforts, we can start to bolster that and increase not only plant palettes, but habitat and support those other creatures. And then one of the things that I think is really important is that you can celebrate the sense of place. You live wherever you live, and it has its own unique beauty. So when we try to make, you know, whatever it might be, when we try to make California look like Iowa or vice versa, it doesn't really, you know, why do you want to do that? Let's celebrate where we are, and the natural beauty where you live. Of course, it's always fun. You know, there are some plants that you might just love. They're exotic, but they make you happy. Then by all means, have those in there, have a mix. But again, you just want to sort of err on the side of more of the native and adapted. A huge one is supporting human health and well-being. We really saw this during the height of the pandemic. Gardening shot through the roof because everybody was stuck at home. So they started to go out into their yards, and seed catalogs were selling out in record time, and garden centers were trying to stay open to support this. But gardening and being out in our landscapes really has huge benefit. It's a stress reliever, blood pressure drops, you're out moving your body, you're getting some sunshine. There are all kinds of benefits that come from gardening and from being outside. And there's the community aspect. If you can, you know, if you're part of a community garden, or maybe you talk to your neighbor over the fence about your gardens. So the human health and well-being component is really a huge one that I think a lot of times is sort of overlooked, not intentionally, of course, but people are focused on the plants and what I'm doing right here. But the benefits that you're getting both mentally and physically can be really significant. Also in the realm of human health and well-being are the materials that we select. Another thing you want to think about, manufacturing is a very consumptive and often very wasteful process. And we don't necessarily think about the life cycle of our materials. So we want to pay attention to that. Again, the reuse of that material for the pathway in Bartoli. I love the story about how they reused the concrete sidewalk, ground that up, and that was the base layer. So they didn't truck it off to a dump or to somewhere else, but they used it and they kept it right on site. So anything that you can try to do, you know, you can get really creative. Anything you can do in your own garden that does that is going to have a real big benefit. The top pathway there, that's at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. Those bricks were reused from another project on site. Again, it's so reusing and recycling materials, and then it avoids the extraction of that virgin material, which can be really destructive. And then also finding materials, if you do bring materials in, find them from local sources, right? Again, you're going to celebrate the regional identity of where you are. I think the stone wall there is from Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken. You're also going to support the local economy. So all kinds of really great benefits. And again, material is one that I think people kind of overlook. They think, you know, they're like, oh, I need some pavers. I'm going to go to the big box store and get some. But, you know, get kind of creative and see what else you can do. Now, providing habitat. This is one of my favorite pieces. I do a lot with pollinator conservation. And it's funny, where I live, this is changing, but there was kind of this idea that if I'm creating habitat and sort of focusing on the bees and the butterflies, then it's not going to be pretty for me or something. I'm not exactly sure where that disconnect comes from, but what do pollinators need? They need flowers. We love flowers. So it really goes hand in hand. I think it goes back again to that thing about maybe it's going to be messy or something, but a beautiful garden for us is also going to be excellent habitat for wildlife. if there's one takeaway that I want people to know and understand when gardening for wildlife, is that we're trying to create places to hide, to rest, and to nest. We also want the food, right? They also need to be able to forage. But if we're talking about songbirds or bees and butterflies or other little critters that you want to attract, you know, here we get lots of complaints about rabbits and deer. People don't want those, but one of the biggest things is that you want to create vertical layers of vegetation, so vertical structure. So it's not just about bringing in flowers, but thinking about what's happening in my nearby outdoor landscape. You know, there's probably going to be some ground cover, there's going to be some perennials and annuals, some mid-story shrubs and grasses, and then some trees. And you want to kind of mimic that. Again, that's attractive to our eye too. That's going to create a beautiful landscape for us. And it's going to give lots of different areas, lots of little niche areas for the different wildlife to use our spaces and to have refuge there. So vertical structure is what's key. Pollinator gardening is a lot of fun, and it really is a much needed activity for the conservation of these pollinators and plants. We can actually serve a vital role in providing these ecosystem services for the conservation of these different environments just through our yards. Even if you just have, it might not seem like it, but even if you just have a patio with potted plants, your plant selection and how you arrange them can really support a lot of species. So have fun with it. Stop and pause. Like once your garden is growing and beautiful, I really encourage people to kind of pause and see who visits. Like the first time a hummingbird comes to your garden or a big pretty butterfly, like that is so rewarding. You know, you created that and you're helping them. If you're interested in pollinating flies and moths and bees, you can really go down a rabbit hole there, which is also a lot of fun. And you can really start to select plants that are very specific to the different pollinators. But it kind of opens up this whole other world to you because you get this more intimate sort of relationship and knowledge and understanding. So I really love when people start to get into this. And then, okay, adaptive management. So I don't really have a big section on maintenance in this talk. We do cover it in our other learning materials. But the takeaway that I think is important to remember is we have to adapt to change. So we can't really be prescriptive. You know, there's the rules of thumb, like, you know, you can start planting things after what, you know, where I am, it's usually about Mother's Day. For people that are up in the mountains, people say it's Father's Day, right? Because they have a shorter growing season. Or you want to clean things up by October 15th, whatever it might be. But things change. The climate is changing. Our environment is changing. So we can't be prescriptive. Again, we have to have that kind of more intimate knowledge of what's going on with the climate, I just mean like the day-to-day climate. Is it going to rain? Are we expecting a freeze? Is it time to cut back the grasses? Should I leave the grasses? But these uncertainties exist. We're working with dynamic systems. Everybody's gardens are starting to wake up right now. Some things might not come back, right? Maybe you lost something over the winter, if you have winter where you are, and you're going to have to replace that. So maintenance, there certainly are specifics to maintenance for a sustainable landscape. But one of the biggest things is you've got to learn to adapt to changes. I think that's kind of part of gardening anyway. It's a lot of trial and error. But then, of course, we can think about, like, you know, are we using gas-powered equipment, or are we using electric, battery-powered or plug-in equipment, and, you know, different things like that. But know that things are going to change. Okay, so that was a quick run through of sort of the general principles of what we teach with Landscape for Life and how you can do your landscaping a bit more sustainably. What Landscape for Life is for you, the tangible pieces, is we have a great website. We just updated it like last week, this week maybe even. There has been one online, but when CSU became partners with USBG, we did some tweaks and some updates. So if you scan that QR code, if you're a QR code person with your phone, it'll take you to the website, or you can see you can type in the website, landscapeforlife.org. Lots of learning material there on that website. Everything that I just went through, only much more detail. And this is for backyard gardeners. It's also for industry professionals. We're finding that a lot of industry folks, landscape professionals, are really interested in shifting their practices. And, they have a difference of scale, and there might be some other differences, but what we're talking about here goes beyond just basic horticulture and basic gardening. And we're really, again, looking at the impact of our practices and how we can have a more positive impact. So that's the website. We also have online courses. And if you go to the website via the written out one or the QR code, you'll see that we also have online training courses. Those are broken into 7 parts. There's an introduction that's free, and it'll kind of set the stage for the other courses. And then the other ones are educational opportunities that are paid opportunities, and we have different bundles, so depending on how deeply you want to dive, but those go into a whole lot of detail. Each one is like 3 to 5 hours roughly of learning material, and you can really dive in there. Another thing that we have under the Landscape for Life umbrella that is somewhat new is a sustainable cities training. So as I said, this is, again, you don't have to try to read those words. This is just a screen capture of the website. But we realized, as I said, industry folks are getting really keen on this, and they're really wanting to change their practices. So this is for municipal professionals. We typically work with Parks and Rec departments. And so I put this up there in case any of you work for cities and you're interested in your community being able to check this out, or whether you work there or you just live there and you'd like, your Parks and Rec department to learn more about this. Again, this QR code will take you to the specific page for sustainable cities, and there's an interest form that you can fill out, and we'll receive that, and then we can get in touch with whoever we need to kind of explore different opportunities there. That's been really successful, and we've worked with 4 different cities here in Colorado, and they've all really enjoyed it and gained a lot of value from it. And then coming up in 2025, we're very excited that the online courses, not the website, but the actual classes, are all being translated into Spanish, and those are going to be available here probably just in the next couple of weeks. So this is, again, is a screenshot from, if you take the online courses, and there you can see the Spanish translation. So we're really excited, and this came with a lot of support from the U.S. Botanic Garden to be able to bring this material and information to other audiences. So we're really thrilled about that. And then finally, I'm almost done, and then we'll open it up for questions. We are developing, this year, we're developing a Train the Trainer program. So again, the image on the right, screenshot from the website. If you did those QR codes, or if you're visiting the website, you'll be able to find all these pieces. So this is currently in development, and it's going to be an online 8-week training. And this is building off really the original Landscape for Life model. It really was a train the trainer kind of thing. People would go through a webinar, learn the material, become certified, and then be able to teach the classes in their communities. So to their master gardeners or garden clubs or HOAs or whoever it might be. So when CSU partnered with the U.S. Botanic Garden, we wanted to kind of make the material available in different ways. So that's why we still have so much of it available on the website. We've created those online learning platforms, and then we'll have this Train the Trainer piece. And so for folks that go through this program, you'll receive the complete teaching toolbox, all the resources you need, and all of the support that you need to learn the material, and then go and teach those classes in your area. And there's a whole crew of Landscape for Life trainers from when the program was first developed, and I know they're out there still teaching it. And if any of you are existing Landscape for Life trainers, we're going to be in touch soon. And we really want to capture all of your experience and your knowledge. And I've been in touch with a few folks, but we're excited to get this one off the ground and available to people across the country. So with that, I thank everyone very much, and we can try to answer some questions if there are any.
Thanks so much, Darren. That was great. Lots of great information and lots of great conversation going on over here in the chat too. So thank you, Katie, for jumping in, answering some of the questions as well. But we've got lots of things to talk about. It seems like there's some interest in some of the stuff you're talking about with soils. And we've got a couple specific questions about soil and connection to plant health as well. Someone was asking about landscaping underneath and around pine trees where they have sandy soil. Do you have any recommendations for that?
So we have a lot of pine trees here too. We don't have sandy soil so much here, but a lot of people in their yards, they see this big open space under a pine tree and they think, ooh, I want to put some garden beds there. However, you want to think about what that pine tree, if it were out in its natural area, is much growing underneath that tree? Probably not. Because if you think about tree roots, some of them go deep, but a lot of them are in the top like 6 to 12 inches spreading out from the trunk. And so there's a lot of root growth right there. And so it's a little bit hard to support other plants and other gardens in that root zone. Because we don't want to damage the tree roots. We don't want to damage the tree. And B, because there's just not a lot of room for other things to grow. So what I would say is, even if you think that there is some area where you can sneak some plants in here and there, be very, very careful when you're excavating that soil, because you don't want to lose the tree for the other perennials or grasses or whatever it might be. Of course, you'll need some shade tolerant plants. And I would say just really pay attention to what grows under those pine trees, wherever you are in the country, naturally. There are going to be some shade loving, maybe some ground covers and a few other little things. But what we really recommend is a good layer of mulch. And then garden, outside of that area. But it can still, if you have a nice layer of mulch to protect the root zone, it's going to hold water in. It's going to hopefully help do a little bit of weed suppression. And it'll give a kind of nice tidy look, and then you can landscape around that area.
Great, thank you. Someone else was asking about improving soil in a new development where the soil is really compacted. It's filled with rocks of different sizes and it's primarily clay. And when it's dry, it's kind of like a brick. Do you have suggestions on how to go about addressing that when you want to get started?
Yeah, that is a great question, one that comes up a lot, and it's a really tricky one. So when we talk about using native plants, often the message, and I even kind of said it, is it's a native plant, so it's going to like your native soil. However, a lot of our housing developments, do not have native soil. They often scrape the soil, build the development, and then bring in kind of crappy soil, like what you're talking about with the rocks and the clay. So it's not always quite as smooth as native plant, native soil. Compaction is really hard to come back from. I have an example. I didn't put the image up, but I have an example of, you can see a garden where there's a ton of ornamental grasses. It's a muley grass, and a utility truck drove on part of it. And then the plants were planted, and you can see that the grasses where the soil was compacted just are never looking as good as the other ones. So how do you overcome that? Clay is tricky. You've got to be careful with that. I would say one thing is you want to match your plants to the soil type rather than trying to amend your soil to get the plants that you want to plant. It's much easier to match your plants to the soil. But also bringing in organic matter is going to help. In a real compacted situation, you might need to till a little bit, or depending on the scale and the size, using a broad fork, if you know what a broad fork is. That's really helpful because it has tines, and you dig it in and then you just kind of rock it back and forth, and it loosens things a little bit, but it doesn't pulverize. So it's going to take some work, but it can be done. So gently breaking up the soil, bringing in organic matter, something like compost probably. You could also do a soil test. We always recommend a soil test, especially in a new development, to see what you're working with, see what kind of things you might need to bring in. And then you can also, this makes your whole gardening journey take longer, but you can do things like planting cover crops. That's a concept that's taken from agriculture. But you can definitely do cover crops in a home garden for a season, because if you choose the right plants, they're going to, again, break up that soil naturally with those really fibrous roots and do that sort of natural process of decompaction and growing, and helping with the soil health. So I would say you have your work cut out for you, but it is definitely doable.
Great, thank you. We've got a question about mulch. Can you recommend types of mulch people could use?
I can broadly. Again, we're on this webinar from all over the country. There are some things that you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about what kind of mulch. So rather than describing specific materials, if it's an organic mulch, and by that I mean pine needles or bark mulch or wood chips, organic versus inorganic is like a stone or a rock mulch. You want something that isn't going to have to be replaced too often. Sometimes people will get like wood chip or bark mulch from a material yard that's kind of been sitting a long time and has actually started to sort of compost, and it breaks down a little too quickly. Granted, that'll build your soil, but then you're having to replace the mulch more often. You want something that hopefully will stay put fairly well. Some areas get high winds or lots of rain and the mulch kind of washes away. And if you're doing inorganic, like a rock mulch, depending on where you live, if you have a very xeric dry garden, you want pea gravel. I don't like pea gravel because it's really the individual aggregates are very round, and so they kind of spill out. But there are other materials that are a little more angular and kind of stay put better. The other thing I was going to say about mulch was, what was I going to say? It's super important. So definitely use mulch. Oh, this is a material. So this falls into the material section. So try to use local, right? So here in Colorado, we get tons of mulch shipped in from the Pacific Northwest, because they've got a certain species of bark mulch and shredded wood mulch up there that people like how it looks and it works well for them. But think of the trucking, right? The emissions that it takes, the hauling that it takes to get it here. Try to avoid that. Try to go with something that's a little more local. When I lived and worked in Austin, Texas, we used pecan shell mulch. Because there are tons of pecan trees and we could get it locally and really easily, and it looks really pretty. So again, I'm not describing specific things to use, but those are things that you want to think about when you're choosing your mulch.
Great, thank you. Similar question, but this one for plants, and this will be very, of course, locally specific, but how should people go about like figuring out good native plants to use for their areas or adapted plants to use for their areas?
There are lots and lots of resources everywhere. I look at different states all the time just to kind of see what's going on. So most, or I should say a lot of states have a native plant society. So, if you're in New Mexico, check out New Mexico Native Plant Society, or wherever you might be, Google that, see if anything comes up. A lot of those organizations, while they tend to be a little more plant conservation and botany focused, they will have a horticulture side of things. And they might even have plant lists for you. One of the really tricky parts about native plant horticulture is the supply. So we have figured out what native plants do well in landscape settings, because they don't all do well. But those plants are not always available. So there's kind of a supply chain bottleneck there. But I will say, if so also engage with your local, nursery and garden center, ask them, those folks, they should be really knowledgeable. And And if they don't know native plants, maybe they can point you in the right direction. But I would say if you're getting really interested in native plants and you're not finding them, ask for them, right? These nurseries and these growers have to know that there's a market for them, and then they will grow them out. So that is a little bit of a tricky point across the country, the supply and demand piece of it. But I would say just, kind of do your Google research, check out the native plant societies, check out the botanic gardens that are in your area. A lot of botanic gardens will have a native plant garden at least, or somebody on staff that might know. So.
Yeah, thank you. We haven't talked about water yet, and someone was asking if you could tell us more about filtering gray water for the garden. Do you have any experience with that?
Sure, I do. And I would say you definitely need to check your local regulations, check in with your city departments or city or state, because some places are going to have more regulations over it. You don't necessarily need to filter gray water, but you do want to be very careful about where you're pulling it from. So I mentioned laundry is a really popular place to pull gray water from, but then you want to be careful about the type of detergent that you use. The right kinds of detergents are out there, but a lot of our sort of typical laundry detergents are high in salt. You don't want to dump that on your garden. And then shower, like people will put a bucket in the shower with them and just like literally have 5-gallon buckets that they take out. You don't want to do things like water from your dishwasher or your kitchen sink or anything like that, because that's going to get a little too mucky. But I would say generally speaking, you don't have to filter it as long as you know what's going in there. So there's not going to be food waste. There's not going to be really heavy soaps and chemicals. It's just water that's had one sort of mellow use, and it's perfectly good to go out into the landscape versus down the drain. But I would really check with your local area, and plug for extension. Check your local extension offices, because they should have information about that.
Great, thank you. We're just about at the end of our time here, so I'll end with a last question for you. If people are interested in making their home landscapes more sustainable, but they're sort of overwhelmed or not quite sure with where to start, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I realize I can be up here and saying, you just do A through Z and boom, you've got sustainable landscapes. I would say start small. If you have one thing that you can start with is if you have an existing garden and something dies out and it's time to replace a plant, check out a native plant. Stick one native plant in the garden, see how it does, see if you get more pollinators. So that's a very simple starting place. Go to garden centers, learn about native plants. If you're doing a whole redo, you're going to have a new pathway, a new garden beds, or a lot of people are ripping out turf in our areas and they want to do a whole big conversion. You can always hire a professional, if it's too overwhelming. That can, definitely be a good option. If you don't want to go that route, I would say, again, just start small, pick a corner of your yard and sort of experiment. Gardening is so much, like I said, trial and error and experimenting and see what works and see what doesn't. But also planning is big. And so as a former, not practicing landscape architect, I, really stress that your first idea is probably not going to be what actually makes it into the ground. So just dream up, whatever sounds fun. Figure out the use areas of your yard. If you have dogs or kids, or you just want it to be, general tranquil habitat, just kind of write things down and process it all, and capture that in your notes, and it'll kind of slowly come together. I will say, if you go through the online training, Landscape for Life training, each section has an exercise, whether it's soils, water, plants, that builds toward a final design. And so that's kind of some of the hands-on exercises and end product that you get after going through those classes, is it actually walks you through how to have a sustainable landscape at the very end, and it chops it up into those bite-sized pieces.
Great, thank you. So lots to learn. We don't have to do it all at once, but there's lots of resources to help us. So.
Yep. Be patient with yourself and be patient with your garden.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Darren, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing all of your expertise and great resources with us.